How many times must you make me say and admit to the world that I have no friends?
Bit Museum, Bit Museum. I like Bit Museum, Bit Museum. I love Bit Museum. We are learning so much about all this cool stuff. I cannot wait for the show.
Anyway, today on this episode of Bit Museum, we're going to talk about some really cool little handheld games that you're probably familiar with. They're very well known, and they are a really cool part of Nintendo history, and that is the famous Game Watch series.
コンパクト
No. Game Watch マルチスクリーン。
シガレットケース No ゲームウォッチマルチスクリーン上下2つのスクリーンで1つのゲーム下から上へ上から下へマルチに展開ドンキーコングオイルパニックスクリーンが2枚で楽しさ3倍ゲームウォッチマルチスクリーン
There's some really neat history behind this series of electronic LCD games, and we're going to go over a little bit today about some of the cooler facts of this neat little handheld device. The Game & Watch series was actually conceived by a genius of a guy named Gunpei Yokoi, which was one of Nintendo's brightest stars. Mr. Yokoi was in charge of sort of innovating new platforms for gameplay. Wasn't so much of a software designer as he was more of a platform designer. And back in the very early 80s, he conceived the idea for the Game Watch series one day when he was riding a bullet train through Kyoto. And he looked over and saw a guy sitting on the train just fiddling with an LCD calculator to entertain himself. And he got the idea that maybe he could take that same sort of technology and incorporate that into a game. And, well, the first thing I want to show you is this particular game that I've been holding in my hand since the start of the show, which is Donkey Kong. A lot of people realize that the design for the Nintendo DS probably came from these multi-screen Game & Watch games. So this is one of the first innovations that Nintendo had created that still sort of exists today in their products. This is in 1982. But there is something else on this game that's very, very significant in terms of Nintendo creations. And it's this thing right here. The raised D-pad controller. And on this Donkey Kong game, this is the first time that Nintendo ever used the raised cross-directional pad for control of a game character. And ever since this time, Nintendo has incorporated this directional pad on actually every system that they've created, from the NES to the Super Nintendo, all the Game Boy units they created, the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, even the Nintendo Wii has this raised directional pad. And this is the first use of it right here on Game & Watch Donkey Kong.
Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch. いつでも Game Watch, どこでも Game Watch, 誰でも Game Watch, Game Watch.
ジャッジボールバーミンファイヤーマイクロコンピューターを使ったゲームウォッチゲームをしないときはデジタル式クォーツ時計です
Game Watch.
Here we have a small collection of Nintendo Game Watch. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive collection. There were 59 of these things that were actually made from, I think, 1980, 1981, up until 1991. As you can see, Nintendo actually worked on a few different kinds of form factors here. They have the vertical dual screen display, horizontal dual screen display, vertical displays like this with color graphics, which is sort of interesting, regular screen and widescreen displays. There are these very interesting units which sort of collapse and close. I mean, this was sort of like a playground for Nintendo to innovate and collect all kinds of new patents and try out new ideas. And there were some really interesting new ideas that Nintendo played with. This in particular is a really interesting technology that Nintendo developed and to this day still owns a patent for. On even some new electronic games, you'll see this technology still being used even to this day. And if you look on the packaging somewhere, it'll say Nintendo. They're using black and white LCD to create color graphics. And the way they do that is, in this window here, there's one sheet of black and white graphics, and below it there is a sheet of color graphics. And what happens is, as the black and white graphics turn on and off, ambient light travels through this window and then projects the color graphics onto a mirror. So it was a really cost-effective, very creative way to create color graphics without actually needing a color LCD screen. Another really, really interesting series of these Game Watch games is the Micro Versus system. Nintendo created 3 of these. This one here is Donkey Kong 3. On the front, all you have are these 3 little buttons, and there's no visible sign of a controller anywhere on here. But that's when it gets crazy, because you open it up. Oh my God! There's little controllers in here. They pull out on cords. Check this out. It's insane. And you can actually play a 2-player game with these little tiny controllers. And the only problem is, if you want to play a game, you need a friend. There is one other Game & Watch which is almost controversial to Game & Watch collectors. I earlier told you that there are 59 total Game Watch units that were created. This is, by some, considered to be the 60th Game & Watch game. Now, why is there some controversy that surrounds it? Well, the reason is, the only way you could get this Game & Watch was if you entered this Grand Prix contest that Nintendo held back in the 1980s, and you were a winner, and you wrote in and got it. So it was a very rare premium item. Only 10,000 of these were actually made. They're very hard to come by, but they're really cool. First of all, the case is this really slick little plastic case of this interesting character. And who is the character, you may ask? Well, let me tell you. His name is Disc-kun. Let me explain. He is basically the mascot for the short-lived Famicom disk system. In the 80s, Nintendo had created this floppy disk drive system that plugged into their home game system, the Famicom, and it used these brightly colored blue and yellow discs to play games. And this was the mascot for that system. It was sort of a short-lived console, and it broke all the time, and it's like impossible to find one that works nowadays. And then you open this thing up by grabbing Disc-kun's crotch. And on the inside, you have a beautiful yellow Super Mario Brothers Game & Watch game. The game is actually identical to the previously released Super Mario Brothers game, which was just a regular retail release. So the games are actually the same. To tell you the truth, it's a pretty decent game of Super Mario Brothers. I mean, it's totally different from playing it on an NES, but it's actually got some depth and different levels and pretty neat sound effects, etc. It does tell the time as well, as all the rest of them do too. Thanks for asking. Nintendo stopped making these Game Watch games around 1991. So now, you have to do some searching to find them. However, Nintendo did license the Game Watch series to another company who is, I believe, still producing these little keychain versions of Game & Watch games. They're called the Nintendo Mini Classics. And this is Donkey Kong. It's exactly the same game, plays exactly the same way, the sound effects and everything are the same, even the dual screens. And it fits on a keychain. You can find these around. Even some stores I think still have them on shelves. So if you're looking to get into Game & Watch collecting, might be kind of an interesting place to start. All right, we're going to take a look at some of these games close up and do a little gameplay. So this is called Mario's Bombs Away. This is apparently years ago when Mario was in the army and was apparently in charge of holding bombs that were lit so that they would explode in his face. This is one of Nintendo's earliest Game Watch titles called Helmet. and it sees you running across a field, avoiding wrenches, hammers, and buckets that are mysteriously falling out of the sky for no good reason. The little character at the bottom of the screen that you're controlling there is officially called Mr. Game & Watch. And Nintendo still uses this character in some of their modern games, such as Smash Brothers and a couple of others I think he's popped up in. And here's one of the miniature pull-out controllers for the Microversus system, which is a really neat miniature Nintendo-style controller, complete with the raised D-pad. Very neat, and you can actually reel the cable back in right here, just like that, and they fold up and they go right back into the case. So, a very neat little design. So here is the special edition Super Mario Brothers game, and it's a pretty nice little case. It's got the metal front with the Mario cartoon like character there, and let's start this thing up. See, it's sort of a platform game. You can jump and you can see the Mario character there. I mean, of course, this is nothing like, you know, Super Mario Brothers like you might have played it on a Nintendo system, but still, it's a pretty unique little title with some depth of gameplay. So that's the Nintendo Game Watch. Nintendo did some pretty interesting innovations with such a simple line of basic LCD handheld games. Next time you're sitting on a bullet train fiddling with an old LCD calculator, hopefully you remember the humble beginnings of the Nintendo Game Watch. If you have any questions or comments or show ideas or trivia, maybe you want to try to stump us, send us an email. You can send it to me directly at jason@robotubegames.com. And send some money too. This stuff's getting kind of expensive.
Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch.
And it's insane. I should think about these things a little bit first before I say them. This show does nothing but make me look like more of a loser. And that's it.
Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch. It's a demo Game Watch, go demo Game Watch, dale demo Game Watch, Game Watch.
ジャッジ